Welcome to the Legal Ethics and the Animal Lawyer Interactive Session. Thank you so much for joining us for the 2021 Virtual Animal Law Conference. My name is Priscilla Rader-Kolp. I'm the Education Program Manager at the Animal Legal Defense Fund. Now I'd love to introduce you to our speaker. Russ Mead is the Shared Earth Foundation Visiting Professor at Lewis and Clark Law School. Russ is a popular lecturer nationwide who uses examples from his career as general counsel for animal rights organizations to illustrate animal welfare and other animal-related laws. Russ has served as general counsel for two of the best-known animal sanctuaries, Best Friends Animal Society and Farm Sanctuary. And Russ served as Farm Sanctuary's interim executive director. Russ also has experience implementing and managing large-scale animal rescues, including during Hurricane Katrina, and has been involved in animal hoarding cases involving hundreds of animals. Russ has written and published grassroots animal law legislation, farmed animal law, nonprofit animal law, and animal law litigation books. Lastly, Russ is an amazing mentor to many students, myself included, and it's a great pleasure to moderate with him today. Thank you all so much for joining us. Let's jump into hypothetical scenario 1 with our first pre-recorded section. We'll see you back here for the discussion. Thanks all.
Well, welcome to the conference. We're back again talking about Billy Miller. Billy Miller, if you've been to one of our conferences before, you know, is a lawyer that wants to move about their lives and help the animals, on top of being a lawyer that has nothing to do professionally with animal rights or animal welfare. She does this to help the animals. In terms of what Billy does for a living, she's a lawyer, and Billy likes to work on boundary disputes. So she goes around representing people when there's a fight between neighbors, whether they're corporations or it's, two people living next to each other about, who owns what. Billy Miller is always a colorful lawyer in whatever town she lives in, and this year is no exception. So she drives around in this hipster mobile. It's an old Volvo station wagon. And so now we know that Billy Miller is a lawyer. We know that professionally Billy Miller does not work in animal law. We know that Billy Miller is an advocate, that she does work a lot to improve the lives of animals. And here we are with this year's conflict. So there's always a conflict that Billy will be working on to try to help the lives of animals. And let's face it, Billy just doesn't follow the rules of professional responsibility. She's always has such a keen eye to help the animals that she just totally forgets that, there are rules about what we can do and can't do as lawyers. And because she's so flagrant in the way that she just disregards these or doesn't know about these rules, it makes it easy to talk about in this academic setting that we find ourselves in, studying rules of professional responsibility. So the conflict. The conflict is a conflict that is going on in a lot of places right now. It deals with dogs that belong to people who don't live in houses, what we would call, or some people would call, homeless. Other people, would call, travelers or nomads. And these dogs travel around with folks, and there are a lot of people who are interested in the welfare of these dogs and are concerned that they don't have proper food or shelter. And of course, every dog and every owner's situation is different. But that's the controversy this time. It's worth a minute to talk about the structure of the presentation today. We're going to be breaking the fact pattern into 3 sections. Then we'll stop, and then there'll be comments coming from you folks or questions. I'll throw some questions out there. What do you think about what Billy just did? And then in the chat function, we'll get some responses, and then I'll address them. Then we'll move on to the next section. So this is interactive. This is our way of making this presentation as interactive as possible, given the fact that, we're, not all together. And once again, because of COVID, we are not all together. And of course, we all long for the time when we can get back together and talk about the work we're doing and the exciting things happening in the field. But for now, this is the way we're going to handle it. And last year it worked well, and we had a lot of great feedback about that we were able to make this interactive. We're going to do so again. So sit back, relax, and let's hear what Billy is up to. So Billy learns that there's a meeting of a group that are going to be talking about these homeless folks and their dogs. The group is called the Friends of Nomads. So this group wants to do all types of different things to help the homeless folks. And in particular, they want to see the local food bank supply dog food, to the dogs. And so they're having a community meeting. Billy finds out about it, and Billy goes to virtually all community meetings that involve anything to do with animals. Well, when Billy is sitting out there in the audience, the executive director sees Billy and does a shout out. Hey, Billy, glad you could make it. Always good to see you helping the folks and the animals out here. And got a question for you. Can the city force the local food bank to give dog food just like they would give food to humans? It was just posed as a question. Again, it was a question posed to Billy, and Billy doesn't really even think about it. And Billy shouts out, well, hell yes. The city under its police power can regulate nonprofits, and of course they can force the food bank to do that. Now, regardless of if that answer is right or wrong, Billy had no clue. She didn't know the answer to this. It's not in her expertise, and she'd never researched it before, but she certainly didn't want it to seem like she didn't have an answer. After all, she's the lawyer that helps people with animal issues, and so she just made that up off the cuff and shot it out, as an answer. Well, the meeting goes on, and then the executive director has another thought, and again calls out to Billy Miller, and the executive director says, hey, Billy, do you mind going down and talking to the city and seeing if they can put some pressure on the food bank to include weekly dog food in the help boxes? And Billy doesn't hesitate at all. Billy says, well, I know Karen Pike. Karen Pike and I go way back. I think, she even owes me a favor from, our high school days together. And I'll be glad to talk to Karen of course, in her role in the city, and see if they might be willing to just voluntarily do this without any real pressure on our part. Well, Billy is pretty busy. There's a local Walmart going in, and it's right up where the dog park is. And, frankly, the dog park for years has kind of eased over into the property that the Walmart's being built on. And so that is a nasty boundary dispute, and Billy's in it up to her eyeballs, both as a animal advocate as well as her professional capacity. So she hasn't had time to work on anything other than, walk her dog and work on this case. So nothing has happened for about, a month or so. So right now, everything is just stalled exactly where it was when she left that last meeting. So what I'd like you to do now is to just think about everything that's transpired. If you've got questions or comments about things that you see that we should probably talk about, or maybe things that Billy shouldn't have done or certainly could have done better, go ahead and just let us know, and then we'll pick it up on the flip side and walk through some of these issues.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We will now discuss that first section. So Russ, what I first noticed right off the bat is Billy seems to like to give advice in situations that might not be the most appropriate for advice. Can you talk a little bit more about what the ethical duties are for knowledge and actually having your a relationship formed with the attorney and client?
Sure. So that's one of the pieces that's at the heart of this presentation is trying to get our heads around, who do we represent? Do we even have a client? I mean, when we're going through these activities, trying to help the animals, I mean, we like to think of ourselves as we're there trying to help the animals, you know, if the animals are our client. But as we know, unless you're, you know, Steve Wise, you know, pushing the boundaries of these concepts, you know, we almost never represent the animals. We're usually representing a corporation, or a nonprofit, individuals. We have clients. The rules of professional responsibility are consumer protection kind of laws to help these clients. And so the first thing is, does Billy answering a question create an attorney-client relationship? And a lot of people are kind of shocked to hear that it does. I mean, it just does. If you're looking for a bright line test, you know, how do I tell if I have a client? What I like to say is, if somebody asks you a legal question and you give them a legal answer, congratulations, you now have a client. That's it. So if you wanted the authority on this, if you look at even the preamble of the model rules, I mean, it talks about all of the duties that you have as a lawyer starts when you start, you know, performing any kind of a legal service, and that includes answering questions. So yes, Billy has a client as soon as she answers a question. So that should scare you. You should be thinking about, okay, when somebody asks me a question, you know, what, you know, should I respond? And the answer is, if you're ready for a new client, go ahead. But if you're not, don't. What else do we have coming up?
Well, with that, what if you said something like, I'm not your attorney, but.
Got it. Yeah, I get asked that question all the time. Well, if that would work, let me tell you what all lawyers would do. I mean, they would have in their engagement contract say something like, and you know, it's okay if I don't give you good advice, you can't sue me. It's okay if I don't put your interests first because I've got some other interests that I'm interested in. And you would try to contract your way around all of your duties as a lawyer. And no, you can't contract around these duties of professional responsibility. I mean, you might be able to limit, well, you can limit the scope of your engagement, but you can't get rid of those responsibilities at all. So as much as we would like to say, well, you know, I'm just answering this off the cuff because I'm trying to help the animals, but no, I don't represent you. No, because what happens if somebody relies on it and then they're injured, or their position helping the animals is injured? You know, that's you've let that client down, and these rules, which are out to protect clients, are going to come down on you.
Yeah, great point. So you can't put it on your business card.
Yeah.
And it's also, I think, important to keep in mind that your understanding of the law and how it works is much more advanced. So even if you think you set clear expectations, the other person might interpret it differently. And I believe it's more so what the client believes is
right. And of course, it's always from the client's perspective. So if somebody is asking you a question and you answer it, I mean, think of what they're thinking. Well, I asked the lawyer that question and this is the answer I got. So they're going to be thinking of it in terms of yes, you know, they followed through. One side thing, the reason this is so dangerous, and, you know, rules of professional responsibility aside, the reason we shouldn't be doing this is when you have a client, just think about that interview process. When you first talk to them and they come into the office, you know, sometimes that's a half an hour long just to get an understanding of the issue. And how many times have we represented somebody and 20 minutes in, they give you the one fact that absolutely changes everything in terms of what the problem is all about? Well, when you're answering a question just out in the public, you're not conducting that interview. So you probably don't have the answers to the questions that you would need to do to even give competent advice. Off the cuff, I mean, you never want to just answer a question off the cuff and have people rely on it, because they probably didn't tell you everything you needed to know.
Great point. Yeah. Angie's asking, duty to act diligently. stating or
Oh,
implying that she could influence a public agent to act in her favor. Very, very good points, Angie. And Piper follows up, what about answering a question that isn't related to the questioner's interests, like the cocktail party question about current political events, not having the knowledge for what you're speaking on? Talk a little
got
bit
it.
about
So
that.
let's start with the diligence. One of the things that we do is volunteer lawyers is we figure since we're volunteering, we'll get to it when we get to it. But the rules of professional responsibility don't place any different rules for volunteer lawyers as opposed to paid lawyers. If you have a client, you have that same duty of diligence that you need to work in a diligent manner to represent them. So if she decides she's not going to work on anything for a month, that strikes me as being outside the realm of what she should be doing. I mean, normally if you had a paid client and you were reviewing them, right, you would get on it. Maybe not within the first few days, but certainly within a week or so, you'd at least be calling, setting up the meetings. What was another one? It's harder for me to keep track. So what's the
people are wondering about the advice she gave without actually knowing whether it was correct, not doing any research into the question, and it not being her area of expertise.
Sure.
Would that be legal malpractice, especially if she was incorrect and they had reliance upon that information?
So it would be malpractice, but it's for the duties of professional responsibility. It comes under the heading of competence. So there's the rule saying that a lawyer needs to be competent in their knowledge to be able to conduct the representation. So the interesting thing is, and I always set Billy up doing something that's totally unrelated to animal law, is you can get the expertise you need to do this work, but you have to read, you have to attend CLEs, you have to do research, and you can get your level of understanding up to the proper level, but she clearly doesn't have it, and she's not making any effort to go get the answers to the questions. And so it's pretty clear here she's violated her responsibilities in terms of competence. She has not got up to speed to answer this, fairly technical question. I mean, she should have, spent some time in the library, or we don't spend times in libraries anymore, but, and on our service that we're paying our money to every month, she should have been trying to figure that out if she was going to answer the question at all.
Great. And I have two more. I have a question going back to the client attorney relationship.
Sure.
How do we, if that does form a relationship, how do we participate in any form of advocacy as individuals without forming that relationship or serving on the board of a nonprofit? How
Sure.
do we navigate that?
Boy, that would, if there was a conclusion to this section, that would be it. There is a way to do it. It's just be the free agent. Don't be anybody's lawyer. And the way you're not anybody's lawyer is not to be giving legal advice. So you have to make the choice. You can volunteer for a nonprofit and don't be their lawyer, and then you can do whatever you want on your own. You can, I'm Russ Mead. I introduce myself all the time as an animal rights lawyer, and then I go off and do whatever I want to do to help the animals, but I don't have a client. Nobody's thinking of me as their lawyer. But what you can't do then is to try to say, well, I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to help the animals by giving all of this advice, but no, I don't want them as clients. That doesn't work. So when somebody asks you a legal question, you say, that's a good question. You need to talk to your general counsel, or does the organization have a lawyer on their board that handles their counsel questions? You should go and talk to them. Yes, it's a very good question, but no, I'm not your lawyer. And so just stop doing that, but continue to do all of the other volunteer work to help on the cause, and maybe even do some significant work, but do it on your own. Don't represent the nonprofits is the way to do it.
Great. Yeah, I remember one of the best pieces of advice you ever gave me is, as soon as law starts coming up, get out of the room. Just walk away and remove yourself.
Unless you're their general counsel or you want to be their lawyer, but that limits you, that locks you out from a conflict basis to be able to work on, with any other entity. And I think most of us would rather have the ability to go and work on the projects from a global standpoint than being restricted to the one client's real narrow interests. Yeah. And remember, not all of these clients have the same interest. How are we doing on time, my friend?
We are actually about to go into section 2. There are still questions, but we'll save them for when we come back.
So Billy finally has a bit of free time and decides that she's going to do a little advocacy work. Well, the first thing she does is finds out that the local feed supply is selling baby chicks out of the store. So she marches on down there with Sebastian and gives the owner of the store a piece of her mind, saying that they shouldn't be selling baby chicks. Well, that promptly gets Billy and Sebastian thrown out of the store. But on the way out, Billy has an even nastier confrontation. She is met by Andy Stauber. Now, Andy Stauber is an old-time enemy of Billy's. He belongs to a group, the Spidey Property Alliance, and they believe that property owners should have special status in the community, and they should do everything they can to protect their property values. Now, this group absolutely despises anybody who does not have a home. I mean, they barely tolerate people who rent, and so they don't get along at all with Billy or anybody that advocates for the homeless. So the interchange just gets really nasty with Billy saying that hey, it's just outrageous that this group would try to take people's dogs away and use that as leverage to get them to move out of town, which is something that this group has done in the past, tried to persuade the animal control department to work with the sheriff's department to confiscate dogs under the guise that the dogs aren't being well taken care of, and then say, oh, you can get your dog back if you leave town. So Billy just clobbers the guy with that. He fires back, saying that Billy doesn't care about property values and doesn't care about the town. And then Billy gets even more angry and lashes out against Stauber's mother and says, your mother goes around, being all prideful about being in the Daughters of American Revolution. And hey, I've researched that organization. There's no way that your mother qualified. I looked into it, and it was just 75 years ago that your family, immigrated from Europe. So saying that the family history goes back to revolutionary times is just wrong. I think I'm just going to go tell the world that your mother's a fraud and embarrass her, and that'll get you in trouble with your own mother. Maybe that'll get you to stop doing this. Well, with that, he just storms off. Leaves Sebastian and Billy in a cloud of black diesel smoke from his truck that he gets to backfire and cover them all in soot. So that was the start of Billy's day, and but then it did get better. So she decides she's going to go over see her old friend Karen, who's now the outreach director at the city, and talk about the two different groups that she's been working with, and what they have in mind, for the homeless dogs. So Sebastian and Billy stop at the Subway, and they get a couple of vegan sandwiches, go over and see Karen, who's always glad to see them, always glad to see Sebastian too. So they have a nice conversation, and Billy explains how the Friends of the Nomads, are really looking for some free food to come from the city, some free dog food to come from the city over to the food bank, and Billy wants to know if that sounds like something the city might be able to do. And Karen says, well, we probably can do that, because the community or the shelter, the city shelter, has lots of extra food. They're donated food all the time. Some of it they can't use. Some of it's not exactly the right type of food that the city wants. So they're always looking for good ways to dispose of that food. So she says, sure, I can't commit to it, but I suspect that's not going to be a problem. And then Billy starts talking about the other group, the group that wants to rehome homeless people's dogs. and then also wants the city to be supplying food and money for vegan food to go over to the food bank. And Karen just, absolutely shuts this down and says, "Hey, Billy, there's just no way it's going to work." Says, the last time that we took somebody's dogs away from them to try to get them to move out of town, it was just a PR disaster. And says, besides, it's just a bad thing to do. So we're not going to do that ever again. And in terms of the food, the vegan outreach just doesn't seem to set well with a lot of the community. So, it's doubtful that we're going to be taking just general funds and supplying fresh vegetables or non-meat products, over to the food bank. We don't really send any money over to the food bank. So yeah, I don't see that happening either. So it was a good conversation. They enjoyed their sandwich. They laughed about some old times, and the meeting ended. So next, it was time to report all of this out. So Billy goes home, puts her feet up, gets her laptop out, and looks at her email, and she's got a posting on her blog, and this posting says, "Hey, about 2.5 years ago, the city came and took my dog and said that if I left town that they'd let me have my dog back, but I didn't have anywhere else to go. And I'm wondering if I can get my dog back. Now I'm really willing to do anything to get this dog back. So if I have to leave town, I will. Do you think I can still get my dog back?" And Billy responds, publicly in this post, says, "Well, hey, you got to understand that I don't represent you, but generally the statute of limitations on most actions in this state are 2 years, and you tell me it's been 2.5 years, so I think you're going to be out of luck. But good luck to you, and certainly hope you get your dog back, but I don't think there's anything you're going to be able to do legally." Then Billy decides, well, I better report out to the two groups on how it went with Karen and the city. So she fires up her blog and she explains what happens, that, it looks like the city is going to probably be receptive on transferring some food over for the dogs, but, probably won't be funding any vegan food. And the city is, wants to abandon any part of the policy of taking people's dogs away from them to put pressure on them to move out of town. Well, Billy wasn't expecting what she got next. Boy, everybody came through and blasted her. The blog post person, wanted to know how come, Billy as a lawyer, is not going to help get the dog back. The friends of the nomads, they're not pleased at all that she had even begun to talk about the plans of the other group to take people's dogs away from them. And that group, the vegan outreach group that wanted to take dogs away, was angry that she was representing the other organization at all, the Friends of the Nomads. So everybody was screaming at Billy, through the internet. Well, Billy had kind of had it. So she just said to everybody, she fires up the blog post and says, I'm sitting here trying to help these animals. I want to help these dogs, and I'm just not getting any support from the community. So, just forget it. I'm not going to do anything more on any of this. I'm going to go back to, working on some other animal issues. I'm signing out here, peace out. I'm done with all of you. So that's where she ends it. And let's talk about, different things that Billy could have done better. So what are your thoughts?
All right. Russ, before we get started into this one, is it okay if I go back to a question follow-up?
Sure.
All right. So, and this is a really good question, I think, because it comes up a lot. If someone goes and has an initial meeting with an attorney to decide whether to retain them, doesn't the attorney usually make sure to say there's no relationship yet during that general consult? So is that an attempt not to form a relationship ineffectively, or is there a way to do that within that?
Well, you can certainly, so the proper way to do this in your practice in general is to have that initial consult and then listen to all of the facts. You ask a lot of questions and then don't give any legal advice. So if you're conducting the interview as you're giving legal advice along the way and then say, oh, and I'm not going to represent you, now what you really have is this difficult situation. If you had a client, you created the attorney-client relationship as soon as you started providing any type of legal services, including answering their questions, and then you terminated it. So that's what would happen in that situation. The best practice, of course, is to just not answer questions, just keep asking the questions, figure out if you're going to represent them or not. If you are going to represent them, start the relationship and then answer all the questions, take on the work. So yes, you have the initial meeting. You have the option of not representing them or representing them, but the obligation triggers as soon as you start giving advice. Again, this is a consumer protection type of act. And so if somebody walks out of there and they say, well, they answered my question and I had these answers and now they're my lawyer. I mean, now you are their lawyer because you've given them advice and they're reacting to it. So you might want to think about those initial interviews a bit. Have you formed a relationship or not?
Great, thank you so much. All right, so getting into part 2, feel free to give us your questions, comments about what you think Billy's up to, what she shouldn't be doing, and we'll be taking a look at them. To get started though, the thing that caught me is the blog. What are your general tips, advice for someone who has a blog, and giving advice through comments, through public means? Does that have anything to do with confidentiality there?
So we've got, well, there's two issues. I mean,
there's a lot, yeah.
Yeah, there's, are you creating a relationship? I mean, if you look at the kind of a bright line test, somebody asks you, for legal advice and you're giving them legal advice in response to their question, if that's what creates a relationship, as soon as you start firing off answers to blog questions, you've established relationships. So that's really dangerous because you haven't done your conflict check. And the biggest thing is, again, you haven't asked them the 40 questions that you probably should ask them to be able to represent them. So yes, but the practice would be everybody comments all they want. And then if you're giving general information out, you can certainly do that, but you're not responding to a particular question. You're not responding to their facts. You're talking in terms of generalities, you're referring people to public sources, things like that. But if it's in response to a blog question, now that's exactly the type of things we look at to see if a relationship started. So yeah, answering blog questions, gives you a whole lot of unpaid clients really fast.
And Rebecca has a great follow-up here. How does lawyering through blog or online in general implicate state-based licensing when clients could be anywhere in the world?
Well, the profession is struggling with that. Well, I'm not so sure the profession is struggling with it. I mean, people are off doing that, but it's not resolved. I mean, there are people who consider themselves, the world is their practice, or certainly the United States is, and they're not licensed in all 50 states. So this is an issue that is, I would say, absolutely unresolved at this stage. We're not seeing a lot of state bars come down on people for practicing without a license, but that's what they would use. So I would say the system, you're exactly right, Rebecca, the system is absolutely not set up to handle our current communication forms. So get on your, volunteer and, try to get some clarity in your states is what I would say. But I don't think this can get resolved for at least, another decade, I'm guessing.
Probably, knowing things.
Yeah.
All right. I wanted to go back up to a point someone made about Billy and Karen.
Okay.
Is there anything about influencing a public agent to act in her favor there, using that relationship?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things going on. There's a really bright line test that comes up in these hypotheticals. It absolutely violates the rules of professional responsibility if you imply that you've got influence over an elected official or a judge or anybody in just call it the system. So if you say, oh, I'm good friends with them, hire me because I'm good friends with the mayor, that is a clear violation. And then there's a whole other piece of, are you, improperly influencing the official? And so I always saw this de minimis kind of thing, like a sandwich in there, and talk about what you can do and you can't do. So you're allowed to do small things that would be courtesies that you would extend to other types of people if they weren't in that position. So it would, it could be give them, something worth a few dollars. A sandwich I kind of put in there it's probably okay, but it maybe is not okay. I mean, actually, if you were an elected official, you'd probably turn the sandwich down. They have rules about what they can take and can't take. So yeah, so you have to think about that. So clearly don't say you've got influence. And the other thing is, just don't give this stuff away unless it's a baseball cap with your organization's name on it or something. You can get away with that, and that's about it.
All right. So Ronnie's wondering the issue of violating attorney-client privilege via Billy's public blog,
Sure.
and just in general of having that and talking about the issues there.
Yeah, so you're a couple of things. Anything that you learn, and people do not understand this rule at all, you have an absolute duty to keep anything that you learn in representing the client confidential. The rule doesn't say you have to keep things confidential that are not in the public domain. It's, you learn something from your client, you can't talk about it unless to anybody other than the people you need to carry on the representation, unless you have their approval. So I think, and this is probably the biggest tip I can give you besides, not forming attorney-client relationships in your volunteer work, but in your engagement contract, just really think about getting permission to talk about their case, to other people. And then you don't have to worry about it. So have that discussion. I can talk about, non-confidential things, for example. You could put that in there. So anything that they don't mind people knowing, you could talk about. Because right now, about something from your client, you've read it in the paper. The rule doesn't differentiate from where you learned it. If you learned about it in the representation, there's a duty of confidentiality. It's a very misunderstood rule. So yes, and clearly Billy has violated it by talking to the world about what happened in representing a client. There's a duty to keep those conversations confidential, again, unless it's been cleared. And, clearly she hasn't gotten permission from anybody.
One more point I just wanted to make before we go into the third section is the conflict of interest. So Billy is representing, the nomads and the vegan outreach. And then she also has clients within her private practice. Yeah,
I'll cover that.
Conflict.
Oh yeah, so I mean, and that's one of the biggest problems when we're doing this volunteer work is, well, I call it the case of the shifting client. You got this client and they're getting a lot of traction on the issue and you're working with them and then they kind of fall away or they're off doing other things. Some other organization comes in. Let me put it this way. Have you ever seen it's a rhetorical question, but have you ever seen two animal nonprofits working in the same space that agreed on everything in that space? I mean, the answer is no. I mean, the organizations end up despising each other because of their positions on some technical aspect of the way they want to help the animals. And so I would say, oh, you have to be careful and watch for the conflicts. I'm going to just say there's a conflict almost every time. I mean, pick any two of the well-known nonprofits, look at an issue and see if they're 100% aligned. And it's like, no, they can be aligned on some stuff, but they're not clearly, their interests are not the same and there's conflict. So that's the problem when you start representing more than one group, is it's almost inevitable. I mean, it would be rare for there not to be a conflict. People don't agree on the way to help the animals at all. Not even on conflicts as stark as what I've painted here, but people wanting to help feral cats, they have different views on how to do it. Same with any animal issue. There's conflict out there in the world that we work in. Yeah.
I've never met even two people who agree on everything, so let alone an organization. Great points. All right, we are ready for section 3.
Every year, the town has Spidey Days. This is a festival where they bring in, kind of a regional or a well-known act. Have some music. There's different games. All the nonprofits come out and put up 10 by 10 informational tents. It's just a good time. There's usually a beer garden going as well. So Billy shows up. She always goes to these things and, of course, knows everybody in town. And the Friends of the Nomads has a booth set up. Billy walks over and, her old friend Sky is there. And Sky says, "Hey, Billy, we've run out of ice. We're selling this vegan root beer. Of course, most root beer is vegan, but said, can you go over to Walmart and get us some more ice?" And Billy says, "Sure." And then Sky reaches over to the cash register, pulls out a $100 bill and gives it to her and says, "Hey, just bring us back the change." And Billy says, "Well, of course." So Billy shoves the $100 bill into her fanny pack, and off her and Sebastian go. They jump into the Volvo station wagon. They go to Walmart. While they're there, they load up the whole cart with ice. They're going down through the pet aisle, and Sebastian starts sniffing this container of treats. So Billy throws that into the cart as well. They get to the end of the checkout line. Billy pays for everything, heads on back. When she gets there, gives them back the correct amount of change from the 100, from just the random bills that she's got, left in her fanny pack, helps them unload, and off they go with the rest of the festival. So the musical talent is the Gin Blossoms, the group from a couple of decades ago. They're still, playing the casino circuit, and they were able to be booked for this event, so they came on down. So Billy is sitting around with a group of like-minded animal people, and they start talking about, just how horrible this group is that would try to run out the homeless people, by taking their dogs. And they're sitting there talking about, maybe somebody should go over to that founder's house, the one that Billy had the confrontation with, and just cut his power out, maybe even wait till the middle of winter when it's cold, just to show him what it's like to, live without the luxuries that, he has. And, they start talking about doing some other, just pretty nasty, things to this guy. And Billy goes, "Well, you got to be careful when you're doing things like cutting the power. That can certainly, get you into trouble. There's trespass, and there's, destruction of property, and, who knows what else. So, just better not get caught when you're doing it. The guy deserves it, but just don't get caught." Well, the night keeps continuing. They're everybody's drinking beer. Everybody's having a good time. Everybody's listening, to Jealousy, the big hit of the Gin Blossoms. And, next thing you know, Sky Summer comes over, pulls up a chair, and Billy and Sky, drinking beer, having a good time. They keep, drinking more and more beer. By the, end of the night, band is closed down, and it's just pretty much the three of them. It's Billy and Sky and Sebastian, and they're looking up at the stars in the park, and, everybody's kind of cleared out. And, they start reminiscing about old times. And I don't know how to really put this other than, next thing you know, Sebastian is sitting in the front seat, and Billy and Sky are, laying down in the back of the Volvo station wagon. And, if the Volvos are rocking, don't come a knocking. And that's how the night ended. They just spent the night and slept it off in the back of the station wagon. So with that, why don't you think about these last couple of things that transpired, and we'll come back and chat about them.
All right, I want to talk about first the commingling of funds. Giving cash, putting it right back into your own personal, where you keep your personal money. What are the rules around that? How should she have behaved?
Yeah, it's rule 1.15, and it says that lawyer has to safeguard the property of their clients. If it's funds, it's got to be kept in separate accounts. It's got to be segregated away. So, I mean, that's not going to strike people as bad because the money worked out, but it probably is a technical violation. But the reason I point this out is there's a best practice that I want to point out. We are often asked to buy things for our clients. We're respected. People know, we're not going to steal from them. And so this comes up often in the nonprofit world. So here's what I recommend. Go and buy the ice, help out any way you can, just pay for it yourself, and then hand the receipt back and get reimbursed. Because if they're reimbursing you, there's no commingling of funds. You don't have to worry about keeping their cash in a separate envelope from your cash, or accounting or anything else. So best practice, buy whatever yourself, get reimbursed. Works every time, will keep you out of trouble if anything ever comes up on that point.
Perfect. Yeah, especially if you add like treats or something personal onto it.
Oh yeah, then it gets, yeah. You're always buying Sebastian treats.
I mean, how can you not?
Yeah.
All right. And then this kind of reminded me of when I was like, just walk away. But Billy did not walk away when they started talking about cutting the power. Can you talk a little bit about?
Right. And so, I mean, it's just a clear ethical violation to help your client engage in criminal activity. And so, this is not hypothetical. I mean, I've certainly been in plenty of situations, usually alcohol involved, where people do start talking about, committing crimes to help the animals. And this is my advice. If these topics ever come up, as soon as you start hearing about it, just say, look, everybody, don't violate the law. Don't even analyze whether it's violating the law or not, because now you're giving advice about violating, and then just get up and leave. I mean, truly, that's a time when you don't want to be there. Because if you try to give good advice and say, well, this is legal and that's not legal, first of all, as a practical matter, that's never going to get communicated correctly. If somebody does commit a crime and they say, yeah, well, when we planned it, our lawyer was there. I mean, they're just not going to have the nuance of saying what you said and say it accurately. So it's better to say, yeah, it was discussed and the lawyer got up and walked out. It's like, well, okay, the likelihood of you protecting yourself is much greater. So yeah, just say, don't break the law, and just, no matter how much you want to stay, just get up and leave. And I've seen it many times. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that there's a lot of other nuanced points we can definitely get into, but I do want to get into the sexual relationship with Sky as well before we get time. So can we talk a little bit about that, best practices within their friendship that I think they had before? Yeah.
Yeah. So this is actually a rule of professional responsibility. The person is not adopted everywhere. I've certainly given these presentations around the country where they say, no, we just eliminate it's inappropriate to have sexual relationships with clients. And that always kind of gets a chuckle, but it makes some sense. First of all, the rule is not what most people think it is. The rule is that you cannot have a sexual relationship with a client unless you had a sexual relationship with them before you started representing them. So then it's okay. So, but think it through. This really makes some sense. And this is why it's not a rule in a lot of states, and it's not a rule in Canada either, where let's say that you've got, you're married, your spouse has some type of, small legal matter, some kind of a ticket, or, representing, them in whatever is going on. I mean, it would be normal to have a sexual relationship with your spouse. And it also would be normal for you to represent your spouse in something that's simple, that's not, super controversial. So that's a case where if you just said you can't have sex with clients, it wouldn't make sense. And so there are entire states that say for that reason, we're going to eliminate it. And when you talk to the bar folks in those cases, they say, kind of tongue in cheek, says, yeah, but that doesn't, the way the states with the rule have it, it really doesn't account for the times when it's good to have sex with your clients. Well, like the spousal situations. And in Canada, I was giving a joint presentation for the ABA and the Canadian Bar Association. And they just said, that the lawyers would need to act appropriately. And this is our way of coming up with the rule, is just to eliminate the rule altogether. So although I did have one funny thing happen, I was giving it, and it was a younger participant said, well, the first thing you need to do when you start volunteering for a nonprofit is have sex with everybody you think you might ever want to have sex with, and then you can start representing them and you're covered. And I say, well, I'm not really sure that's what they had in mind, but I guess on a law school exam that might work, but yeah, I'm not sure that that's
trying to find those loopholes. A true law student.
Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any other, little things that you noticed that Billy did that you want to pick up on?
So the main thing is how I'll go ahead and recap, this whole talk for a bit. What I think everybody on this call should do is think about how they're going to conduct themselves in terms of advocating for the animals. Think about doing it either lock into one organization and represent them full on, give them the best representation you can, help them through, whatever issues they are, knowing that your interests aren't ever going to be 100% aligned with theirs, but if it's close enough, just go and do it. That works. The other thing that works is represent no one. And so resist the temptation to go through and say, start giving legal advice and then try to say, but I don't represent you. I mean, that's the problem that a lot of lawyers get into. Don't do that. Instead, there's all kinds of things that you can do to volunteer to help an organization and not be a lawyer. You just have to get over the fact that no, you can't give legal advice. I mean, just don't give legal advice and do everything else that all the other non-lawyer volunteers are doing. And then if you are going to, do something, do some legal research, write a bill, do whatever, do it on your own and brand it, label it as your work. And so you're part of a movement at that stage. You're a lawyer that's working independently as part of a movement, not representing clients. You can do that. I think both approaches are satisfying and work for lawyer activists. So I'm not saying don't be a lawyer activist. Go down one of those two paths, but don't try to straddle the fence and end up like Billy, because at the very minimum, you're going to have conflicts because the groups will never agree, by the time they work their way through this. So that's the big picture advice that I would give as a best practice. Well, we have a couple of more minutes. Should I go ahead and wrap us up and let everybody know how this works out?
Yeah, let's hear what happened to Billy.
All right, so this is I've scripted it. So the city council stepped up and created a new homeless shelter, and it included an RV park for the nomads. The city has a food bank twice a week that distributes to the shelter and to the RV park. Now the distribution includes dog and cat food. Billy got Bar Advocate of the Year for all of her great work with the homeless dogs. And now Montrose drives around with Billy and Sky, putting on fundraising events to raise food for dog food drives for food banks. So that's how it all ended up. Everybody was happy at the end. And I always appreciate the opportunity to come and speak at this conference. And certainly it's always good to see Priscilla. So good luck out there, and go out and help the animals, and let's keep the movement moving.
Thank you so much, Russ. And Mark just offered a different comment too, that you can start your own nonprofit, and Russ has a book about that, doing just that, and is really, really helpful with that too. So there's a lot of resources, and that's a great way to have a more ownership over your work. So great point too. Thanks again, Russ. Always a pleasure. And thanks to all of you. Go do good for the animals. We'll see you next time.